All right, you guys. So this is going to be my first like on-camera YouTube video, and it's shot on an iPhone, so kind of forgive the camera quality. But today we're going to be doing the valve cover gasket on my 2014 BMW 435i N55 motor. It's actually a pretty easy process, and I figured I'd actually kind of do a little bit more in-depth video on how to do certain things on this car. Just because TikTok doesn't really allow you to go like super in-depth with, tutorials and whatnot. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to show you guys the tools that you need to do to properly do this job. All right, so I've got all my tools laid out in front of me here. I'm going to go over all the essentials and then the stuff that is kind of optional that would make the process a little bit easier / more convenient. So first up, you're obviously going to need a Torx and e-Torx set. I don't think you quite need one this big because we're not going to use all these sizes. But I picked this up just because, when I'm at work, I don't know what I'm going to need and what I'm not going to need. This set was about $350 from Mac. You don't really need anything this expensive, but like I said, it's all encompassing and you never really know what sizes you're going to need, especially with the e-Torx bits because BMWs are basically made of them. Next up, you're going to need a decent torque wrench that has a little bit lower torque range. This is my Precision Instruments. I think it's like a 16 to 100 foot-pound torque wrench. Torque spec on the valve cover bolts, if I remember correctly, is somewhere in the ballpark of like 10 foot-pounds, but going up to 16, since that's the lowest this will do, is really not going to kill anything. This was about $250 from Matco. I recommend spending good money on a torque wrench because generally the cheaper ones are not as accurate, and this is one of those jobs where you kind of want to be accurate with your torque. Next up, we have adapters and reducers. I don't think we're going to use too many of these, but in my case, I might use them just because of the fact that, for example, some of these smaller e-Torxes are 1/4 inch drive, and I use a lot of 3/8 tools. So just having that 3/8 to 1/4 inch reducer kind of helps out in the process. I don't know why my camera is having such a hard time focusing. Next up, the more useful stuff. You don't really have to worry about the 1/2 inch and 1/4 inch swivels. I'm really getting frustrated with this camera right now. You don't really need to worry too much about these. The 3/8 swivel is going to be very useful because as you get towards the back of the valve cover, the bolts, you can't really get to them straight on. So that swivel is going to come in handy a lot. I've also got this swivel adapter that I picked up from Matco. I brought it home just in case. I think I'm going to probably end up using one of those Pittsburghs a little bit more just because of the fact that this is really wide and it might not fit in the little angles that we're going to try and get into. These are the cheaper tools, just a Pittsburgh 3/8 ratchet. I don't think I'm going to use this very much. I just picked this up because I don't have a ratchet at home. Most of my tools are at work. Next up, extensions. You're probably going to need to make like a kind of elbow with the swivel and a couple extensions just to make sure that you can get at the right angles. These, I don't think we're going to need these too much. We're just going to skip over these. If these come up in the video, then I will obviously mention them, but I doubt there's going to be any Phillips or flats in this. It's been a while since I've done a valve cover on one of these. Next up, this is the optional stuff. So this is a Mac brand electric ratchet. I don't remember how much this was. It fits DeWalt batteries, which is kind of nice. I usually avoid using hand ratchets just because of the fact that this thing makes stuff so much quicker to do. If you're going to work on your car consistently, I heavily recommend investing in one of these. Milwaukee makes a really good one for a really good price, and you can find that pretty much anywhere. And the next up, we've got our DeWalt little cordless impact. This thing, it's not really an impact. It's just a driver that impacts when it gets down, but it doesn't put out a whole lot of torque. It's just good for, making things quick. So I've let the car cool down quite a bit since I pulled in the driveway, so we're going to go ahead and get started with tearing things apart. Also, side note, wear gloves when you work. Not really for, I'm not a Nancy about safety. I don't care about, sometimes I spray my hands with brake clean just to clean them off. I know that there's a lot of people that say, oh, don't do that. I wear gloves because it makes it easier to keep your hands clean as you're consistently working. So if for whatever reason I need to go inside my car or go inside the house, I don't just have a whole bunch of shit all over my hands from when I was working. So gloves are just a really easy way to keep yourself clean. You get your gloves too dirty, you get like oil on them, rip them off, throw a new pair on. I've got a whole box right there heavily recommend that. Trust me, once you start wearing gloves, you just can't go back. Okay, so the first thing that we're gonna do with this thing is we're gonna go around back and disconnect the battery. I'm not gonna bore you guys with all the steps on how to disconnect the battery. You guys probably already know how to do that. But the reason that we do that is so then that way when we're taking off all of the lines and rails on the high pressure side of the fuel system that run over the valve cover, we don't run the risk of doing anything electrically that'll trigger the low pressure pump and cause the fuel system to build pressure and just piss fuel everywhere, because these cars are really sensitive. You hit the unlock after it's been sitting for a while. You open a door after it's been sitting for a while. You basically wake the car up in any way electronically and it'll prime the fuel pump, which is not something we want when the fuel system is disconnected and open. So we're gonna go ahead and do that, and then we're gonna start working around up front. All right, so first step is gonna be to free these oil cooler lines off of the valve cover. It is a T25 that sits right there. And then you can just kind of use your hand and carefully bend these out of the way, just so then that way they're not impeding on the valve cover as it comes off. All right, so our next step is going to be to remove this little plug from the valve cover. It's just two little tabs on the side and it pops right off. It sits right here, and then there's a flange held on with two E6s. You just unscrew those and then you can just kind of pry the flange off carefully and you should be good there. All right, now we've got a couple things off up front, but what we need to do before we go any further is take off our wiper blade arms and then remove this entire cowling right here. So I'll go through step by step and show you guys how to do that. Now to get your wiper blade arms off, it's fairly simple. It's just a 16 holding each one on, knock those off, and then you're gonna have to kind of bend the wiper blades up and just kind of pull at them back and forth, and they'll eventually come loose. If it's the first time in a while you've had your wiper blades off, they're probably gonna be stuck on there pretty good, so you're just gonna have to fight with them a little bit. All right, so you just go ahead next and take all of these little 10mm plastic nuts right here, give them a quarter turn to the left, counterclockwise, and these little trim pieces should be able to pop right off. All right, so next step, you wanna free this. This will just pull off of this little brace piece right here. You can get this off, but it's a little bit of a pain in the ass, and I usually just kind of leave it hanging about. It's not that bad about getting in the way, so we're just gonna leave that there. Next up, you're gonna take if I remember correctly, these are T30s, and you're gonna turn them the same way, quarter turn counterclockwise, and you're gonna take the windshield cowl piece off. All right, next up, we've got a couple E18s. We've got one in the corner here, two in the middle, and then one in the other corner right there to get this chassis brace off. Super easy to get off. I've got my little cordless ratchet. Give it a quick turn because these are torqued down pretty tight, and then just zip them right off. All right, so next up, what you guys are gonna wanna do is take off your wiper blade motor here. It should be two tins, one right here and one right here, and then just unplug it and you should be able to get it out of the way. All right, so the next thing that you guys are gonna wanna do is go ahead and get all the tins off that go around this little plastic piece right here. Actually, that's metal. Anyway, get all these tins off, and then this little bracing piece will come right up too. All right, so next thing that you guys are gonna wanna do is unplug our O2 sensors. They run kind of across the engine, so they will get in the way. They've got a little holder right here that they pop out of, and then you can take this gray tab, pull it back, push it down, and then with a little bit of force, you'll be able to get them unplugged. All right, so next up, what we're gonna wanna do is remove that little holder. It is a T30 right here. Just like that, super easy. And then we're gonna wanna go ahead and remove all of our coils and start getting this harness out of the way. All right, so the next thing that we're gonna wanna do here is take off all of our grounds and unplug our fuel injectors. The fuel injectors can be a little bit tricky. You're just gonna look in here. There will be a small tab that you pop a screwdriver in there with, and you can just pull up and they will unplug. And then this is just going to be an 8 to get rid of these grounds. All right, so next step, what we're gonna do is we're gonna go ahead and remove this little retainer that holds all of this harness in. It's just a couple of T25s and then it'll pop right off. All right, so next thing that you guys wanna do is get this CCV hose off. Be fucking careful. This tab broke, which isn't the end of the world if you break one of the tabs. The top and bottom tabs are a little bit thicker. These side ones you really have to be careful with. Just pry these up little by little, and work your way around with 2 screwdrivers, just kind of backing it off, and you won't crack it if you're being careful, but be careful because this thing is very brittle and very easy to break. All right, so I went ahead and I just kind of tucked it under a couple of hoses here just because it's out of the way of the valve cover at this point, and the bolt that holds it onto the turbo inlet is really weird to get to. So, you know, just make it easy on yourself. You don't really have to go out of your way for this. All right, next up comes the really interesting part, which is these fuel rails. First thing you want to do is ever so slightly crack this 17 loose, let it hiss a little bit. Depending on how warm or cold the motor is, there could be a lot of pressure behind this. So you don't want to just rip it off, because if it is at full pressure, it is actually kind of dangerous. And then after that, once you've got that loose, go ahead and loosen all of your 14s on each of your fuel injectors until these are free. And then there's a couple of 11s that just hold the whole rail to the engine here. Go ahead and take those off and you can kick this whole thing out of the way. All right, the next big step, this is kind of the one big step. 26 E10s hold this thing on across the entire valve cover. You've got them around all of these little squares, and then you've got them all around the perimeter of the valve cover. So we're gonna go ahead and do that. All right, now that we've got the 26 bolts out, you just want to carefully, don't, work too hard trying to get one side to pull off, because you will warp and or crack this valve cover. What I usually do is I kind of start in this corner with a screwdriver and just carefully pop this side up, and then you can just kind of go around and give it a little pull until it's kind of loose all the way around. And now it's just about ready to come out. It's just a matter of kind of finagling it until it wants to come loose, which it looks like we're pretty close to right now. So just kind of got to make sure that you apply even pressure all the way around. Don't strain anything. Oh, there's one of the captured bolts that just came out. Anyway, there. And it's, like I said, it's kind of a fight, but it'll eventually pop out. And the gasket is still kind of stuck to the motor, so it's fighting us a little bit here, but just got to kind of pull away from the motor. Not worried about damaging the old gasket because obviously we're replacing it. And there we go. Let the old gasket kind of just do its thing. It's gonna pop out. And there is our N55 valve cover removed. And as you can see, our valve train actually looks like it's in very good shape. This is the first time seeing, or for me, this is the first time seeing the valve train of this car. So I am very impressed with the condition of it. Makes me kind of glad to know I didn't buy a lemon. But yeah, so this is what an N55 valve cover looks like over here. It's a pretty hefty unit. Give it a good look around in the light just to make sure, because any warpage should be visible with a good eye. And usually if you're under 100,000 miles or this is the first valve cover gasket replacement on your car, you shouldn't have a warped valve cover. This one's at 76,000 miles right now. Valve cover is perfectly fine to the eye, and it really shouldn't be warped at this mileage. It's very rare for them to warp at this low of mileage. So we're just gonna go ahead and replace the gaskets, put it all back together. All right, so we just got back from a couple-hour break just to go eat and chill for a little bit. You're gonna wipe down with your rag of choice all of your gasket mating surfaces. Just make sure they're nice and clean, because as you can see, shit comes up. So we're gonna go ahead and wipe all of our mating surfaces down, and then we're gonna jump to installing the gaskets onto the valve cover. All right, so now we've got our old gasket off of the valve cover. And if you inspect it, actually, you can kind of see that it flattens out over time here. This is what's going to cause your oil leaks. This part really, oil doesn't leak past because it sits inside the valve cover, but this is the part that meets the cylinder head, and it's pretty flat if we take our new one and kind of compare it. This is also a lot less stiff. It's a lot more pliable than our old one is. It's a little bit hard, but our new one has kind of a little bit of a raised ridge there that will seal a lot better against the cylinder head. So we're gonna pop those 3 gaskets out and then go ahead and install all of our new gaskets, and we'll go ahead and show you a time lapse of that. All right, so now comes probably the hardest part of this entire process, and that is just seating the valve cover onto the engine without lipping the gasket. So if you look back here at this back corner, that back square with the injectors and, you know, coil packs, it is very hard to not lip the gasket off when you're trying to slide this valve cover over that. You have to be very careful. If you lip the gasket, don't try and seat it down, just pull it back off. Even if you think you lip the gasket, better safe than sorry. Pull it back off as many times as you need and check the gasket. Like I said, this is probably the hardest part of the entire process. Don't be surprised if it takes you a couple of tries to get this right. All right, so next step is a big part, just about as big as trying to get the valve cover on without lipping the gasket, is checking around the edge of the valve cover just to make sure that you didn't lip the gasket. You should be able to see the edge of the gasket kind of around the valve cover here, especially in certain parts like where there's a little tab. I believe there's one either on this side or this side. There should be a tab poking out of your valve cover. Yeah, right here. Make sure that that is visible, and then just look around with a flashlight. Get a mirror if you need to see the back, because the back is the really sketch part. But just make sure that you haven't lipped the valve cover gasket anywhere, and then once you've done that, you can get to tightening everything down. All right, so now that we've inspected, I've kind of looked around the valve cover, made sure that the gasket's on there properly. Next is, as you can see, I crumpled this up thinking I was done with it, but brain fart. This is our all data printout from the BMW service manual. This is the order in which that you need to tighten the bolts, and it also has the torque spec of 8.5 Newton meters. Like I said, my torque wrench won't go that low. Torquing them to 16 foot-pounds is not a huge difference. It's not going to kill anything. But just what you want more than a specific torque value is even torque across all of the bolts in the right order. If we up torque it to 16 foot-pounds, as long as we follow the torque sequence and it's all in the right order, a lot of times, actually 99.9% of the time, it's not going to cause an issue. And especially given that a common fix that I've run into with these valve cover leaks is when it's not leaking terribly bad. One of the easiest fixes is just torquing the bolts down a little bit tighter than factory, and a lot of times it stops leaks fairly quickly. But it says to tighten screw number 1 and then tighten screw number 2 and then just follow the rest of the sequence. This is what they call the positional screw, or the fit screw. This is the positional screw, and it basically kind of sets, you know, the valve cover down corner to corner, and then you follow the whole rest of the process, and it's pretty straightforward from there. All right, y'all, it's about 1 in the morning right now. We just finished up, car's back in one piece. Everything is running beautifully. No leaks or anything. Now, we did take kind of a massive break in the middle of it just to unwind for a few hours, watch some YouTube, get some food, you know, the whole so on and so forth. Now, I didn't feel like I needed to show y'all the step-by-step reinstallation process because it's more or less just the reverser removal. But if you need a refresher, I will put a splash screen right here explaining how to, you know, put everything back together step by step. So boom. All right, cool. Now, one thing to keep in mind, the total amount of time that I personally spent on this was about 3.5 hours, not counting the massive break that we took. So that's for a trained technician. You know, this is not my first BMW valve cover. I've gotten pretty quick at them. I do this for a living. Now, if this is your first time, or, you know, you're not super mechanically inclined, don't worry. It's still a very doable job. And I hope this video gave you enough pointers to do it yourself and, you know, take it on. But don't assume that you're going to get it done super quick. The first one will always eat your lunch, especially on something like this. This is not the easiest valve cover in the world to do. So I would say if this is your first time, definitely set aside probably a good, I don't know, 6, 7 hours, just to play it safe. Even give yourself the whole day if you can, find a Saturday or a Sunday where you can just wake up in the morning, start doing it, and just, take your time. Don't rush anything. Don't mess anything up. But yeah, I mean, it's not terrible. It's something with a lot of steps to it, and there's a lot of things to pay attention to detail with, especially when you're putting that valve cover back on, making sure that it's not lipped, because that would be the worst thing ever, is putting it all back together and then finding out that you're still leaking oil. That would absolutely kill your demeanor. That would kill your morale of wanting to do it again. But I hope this video helped you guys. I really hope that there was something to be gained from watching this. And I hope that if you're looking at this video, thinking about doing your N55 or B58 valve cover yourself, that you've got the confidence to go ahead and do it now, because trust when I say it's really not all that hard. But thank you guys for watching, and next big job I do on my car, hopefully I can get a video done for that too, and you guys can learn a thing or two. So see you guys.